ESPN NBA writer Kevin Pelton ranked the trade. He gave them grades. He gave the Spurs a D, and he gave the Raptors an A-. Sylvie, do you agree with these grades?
No, absolutely not. Kevin Pelton knows a lot about hoops. I like him to begin with. But let's go through this. First of all, you just asked about faith. I've got faith in Gregg Popovich. Gregg Popovich rolls out of bed with a B. All right? Anything Gregg Popovich does, he rolls out of bed with a B, and then we judge from there.
Regardless of topic, he just rolls out of bed.
That's what I mean. He's one of these guys. Any team that he assembles, if you underestimate, you are going to be in trouble. This is a guy who always gets the max out of somebody. Kevin Pelton wondered about his defensive liability. Yes, DeMar DeRozan is not a perfect player, but he's a 28-year-old who will play for the San Antonio Spurs, which is more than Kawhi Leonard wanted to do. So when you talk about the Spurs angle, this was a guy who told the team that he did not want to play for them anymore. He would not play, wanted to go to LA. And as I keep telling you guys, you get a 28-year-old All-NBA player who is still a 1 or at very least a 1A in this league, and 2 young assets, a first-round pick and a young player who Gregg Popovich will have success with implementing. So I have the bigger issue with not so much the Toronto aspect, even though I don't think they should get an A. But there's no way that Gregg Popovich gets a D for anything he does, except maybe a Doris Burke interview.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Look, I'm with you. I would give the Toronto Raptors a B. And I think, Will, you even expressed earlier today in our meeting you are more open to what they did than maybe you were yesterday when you were drilling me about saying the same thing.
So
that's
right.
a conversation for another time.
That's all I heard.
But I would give the Raptors a B for what they did. Didn't hate it, didn't think it was great, took some risk. But I'm with Sylvie on this. I give the Spurs an A here. You were basically faced with getting nothing in return for a guy who was going to leave at the end of this year if you didn't find a trade partner. What you got in return was a top 15 player who is under contract for the next 2 years. And I believe they got a protected first-round pick as well. Did they not? So
yeah, right. Top 20 protected.
Yeah, so
and the Raptors will be out of that top 20.
So I don't know how you look at this scenario and suggest, with all due respect to Kevin, I don't know how you suggest that the Spurs were somehow taken or borderline failed this trade when you got an All-NBA player for somebody who was going to leave your organization at the end of the season.
So now if we throw loyalty out of the way, because obviously both teams have failed players on a whole as far as it comes to loyalty, I give an A+ to both sides. If you're Toronto, you needed change and you needed to compete now. They've got a young group, but they got some contracts in which they can't get off of. They got to make moves. And Kawhi Leonard plays new NBA basketball, and they've got size and versatility.
If he's healthy.
If he's healthy.
Because
that is a huge factor.
If
We're
not,
all
his
in.
stock is like right here on the ground.
We're being honest. We're going to be honest with each other. Ask DeMarcus Cousins with one offer on the table. And if you're San Antonio, what I love about San Antonio, they're not willing to blow it up. They made a move for the now and for the later. They got a first-round pick, and they got a guy by the name of DeMar DeRozan. What makes DeMar DeRozan special in the Spurs offense that I know from competing against them is when they have a catalyst, a playmaker, a guy who can draw a double team, Pop can go now and run his offense. He can spread the floor, and he can teach those young players. So I love that they are willing to compete in this year's playoffs, put together a winning product, and they got a first-round pick. They're still thinking about the later. And I just despise teams that throw it away.
Tom, I did hammer you a little bit yesterday for kind of wavering,
cool.
for warming to the deal in real time. I did sleep on it. Yesterday, I would have flip-flopped Kevin Pelton's grades. I would have given the Spurs an A and Toronto a D on this trade. I would have been wrong. Here's why I'm warming, okay, for 2 main reasons. First of all, when it comes to the Spurs, we all agree that grade should be higher. And it's not necessarily Kevin went into a wonderful basketball breakdown about what DeMar DeRozan's deficiencies are on the defensive end. He's a mid-range shooter. This is not where the game is. You got to have a three-point shot. And I understand the fit concerns of DeMar DeRozan. That being said, I look at it from the Spurs' perspective, from a market side. Like, how are they going to beat this deal? What was the offer out there that they walked away from that they could have had? I do think, as you said, they got the most out of a potential Kawhi Leonard trade that they possibly could have. So I would have raised their grade. But here's the thing. I'm warming to Toronto's side for 2 reasons. I think that the filler in the deal, okay, Jakob Poeltl and the pick that you mentioned, is pretty cheap from Toronto's side. They held on to DeLone Wright. They held on to OG Anunoby. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name.
You said it right. Good job. Good job this time.
The first time you're going to compliment him all show, right?
Yeah. They held on to those two guys. They held on to Pascal Siakam. They held on to a young core that I would have thought the Spurs, I'm sure they did demand, but the Spurs could have pulled off in addition to DeMar DeRozan. But more importantly, here's why I am warming primarily. If this doesn't work out, if Toronto's looking at this, they do have an asset in Kawhi all the way through the season. And if one of those LA teams, the Clippers or the Lakers, want to get a jump and secure Kawhi and start negotiating that long-term contract before the other gets a bite at the apple, Toronto can flip Kawhi mid-season and start that young rebuild with whatever you could get for Kawhi in January, February. That might end up being a better asset to build around than DeMar DeRozan's remaining contract when you're trying to start over.